All right. Good morning, Buckeyes. Let's go ahead and get started on this rainy Tuesday morning. If you can and you want to, please go ahead and flip on your cameras. It's nice to see you guys. It's helpful for me being able to keep track of how things are going with taking notes and things like that. So I always appreciate that. So I think this morning is going to be kind of an entertaining morning. It's one of the first times that I've kind of find it weird mix up of kind of multiple things going on with being at home. So my dog, who usually Lily, who has nothing to do with me, she usually hangs out totally by herself, is now totally planted in my office. So we'll see how much she barks in response to both it raining and Kitty working out in the other room. We got it thunderstorming outside, so it's all kinds of weird things that we don't normally have to address and deal with in a classroom situation. So hopefully you guys are enjoying kind of the weather outside and in good safe place. Your animals are keeping you company as well, and we'll take care of things today. So what we're going to do now is start focusing on what is the remainder of the semester. And so you'll see that this is actually going to kind of clip by quickly, I think, compared to things that we've been talking about. And so our first topic for us is going to be talking about stereotyping and prejudice. And just as kind of a reference point for you guys, a lot of times in an intro to psychology class, in our intro to social psychology class, we talk about a concept, maybe for just a few days in intro class. Maybe we'll talk about something for a full week. And that's about as much as we get a chance to talk about it. In the case of something like stereotyping and prejudice, we'll talk about it for this week, maybe a little bit more past that. But I actually teach an entire class on this. It's actually offered quite often. Dr. Weiser also teaches a class on this. Maybe you're taking it with her. Maybe, in fact, you've taken stereotyping and prejudice with me already before. So it's a cool class. It's a great class. But just to give you guys kind of a sense of how things look and how things kind of work, some of these topics we really can expand on quite a bit. So there's a lot that we'll kind of put together, try to get through the foundation pieces today and tomorrow, or Thursday, I should say, with stereotyping and prejudice. Before we do that, though, I want to take care of a couple announcements, check in with you guys, make sure that we're good to go. So one of the first things is that we went ahead and we took care of exam 3 last week. And so I want to give you guys kind of average on that, look at scores, check in on some of like the mechanics of the class. So the first thing is that kind of going through the averages, we started off doing well. I thought we made a great jump on exam number 2, so I was really excited about that and really appreciative of you guys doing that. Okay. We then had a nice jump on the third exam average with the one that we just took. And I recognize that this is a big jump in part because we took the exam online. But again, it's great to see this kind of continued improvement. And so I appreciate you guys doing a nice job with exam number 3, taking the time to go through and carefully read the questions, go through them, process them, answer them well, to take that additional time. I know you have lots of different things going on, lots of different stressors, and just a lot to be dealing with in life. And so I appreciate you guys taking the time to knock this out, to do a great job on exam number 3. So we get to keep seeing this continued improvement. You guys now have a feel for what it looks like with taking the exam, how that process works. Again, you'll see it wasn't really all that different compared to the first 2 exams in terms of the structure of the questions. But again, you're just doing it online instead. So with that being said, with the class or anything else, I'm happy to help. If there's things that you think I have resources for, I can be helpful with, I'm by all means happy to help with things. But you guys did a very nice job on exam number 3. So let me kind of pause just a minute here to see if you have any questions related to the exam. But I just want to say again, I appreciate you guys taking the time to do a nice job on it and continue to see those averages go up. So let me pause. You can either kind of jump in through the audio, or if you have a question, I can handle it through chat as well. All right, seems like we're set. We'll go ahead and jump in and let me know otherwise. One of the other things that came up, just kind of checking with students, was the music extra credit opportunities. So again, there still is a music extra credit opportunity. What I'll do is I'll review the music extra credits as you turn them in to make sure it meets the requirements. So the music extra credit, what you're supposed to do is posted on Carmen. I believe it's under extra credit module heading. I've also talked about in other lectures and things like that. So it's available for you guys. Basically, the way this is going to work, it has to be signed off by me by the end of our class on April 23rd. So basically, with the music extra credit, you're going to pick a concept, define it in your own words, and then apply that concept to a song. So why does that song demonstrate this concept? You're going to talk about why that song is a good demonstration of the concept. and then you'll email it to me. What I'll do is I'll make sure it meets all the requirements. If it does, then I'm happy to award you extra credit. If it doesn't quite meet the requirements, what I'll do is I'll work with you on that. So keep that in mind, that this is an extra credit opportunity. I know I have 2 students working with me right now, one I've gotten back to, one I need to get back to. So please keep in mind too that you'll probably get a little bit of a slow response as I focus on some of the kind of larger picture things. But I want to kind of throw that out there and let you guys know that the music extra credit opportunity is still there. So basically what we have left is 2 more kind of writing assignments. And I'll post those for you, make sure it's clear for you. And our last exam. So our last exam will cover the material starting today, going all the way through to the end of the semester. And I actually think it's kind of interesting to take a step back and realize that this is actually the first section of material that we'll be learning entirely online. So our previous exam actually covered some material that was still talked about in the classroom. So it's hard to imagine that, but we did go way back before spring break. We started that last exam section in class altogether. This will be the first time we'll go through entirely with only online material. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how this process works for us this way. So let me pause at this point to see any questions you have, things I can help you with. Just kind of check in with you guys before we're going to get into start talking about stereotyping, prejudice, discrimination. But want to kind of check in, see if you had questions, and just to see how you guys are doing. So let me know if you're doing well, how things are kind of going. I'll take a pause here for a second. You guys good? Is it raining by you? Katie just closed the door. She doesn't want to hear a lecture. You guys can't quite do the same, just close the door off, huh? All right, should we get to it? All right, let's get to it then. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna start off with kind of one of my favorite questions to ask in the course of the semester, and I want honest answers because I think it's funny and entertaining. What are some common stereotypes about dads? Okay, so let's rattle off as many as you can kind of think of. You guys can also cheat like crazy because you're right in front of your computers. You can even Google stereotypes about dads. What are a couple stereotypes about dads? Let's generate kind of a number of these. All right, so you got the first one, the very typical one, the kind of bad dad jokes. So I like to own those. You guys know that. I do wonder if this is a evolutionary based thing or a cultural thing. I feel like I have not only developed the bad dad jokes. Okay, so you have bad dad jokes. What are other stereotypes about dads? Okay, so that classic old rock music that dads listen to, so I can be guilty of that at different times. Okay, so very nicely done. Okay, other stereotypes. Let's give about 5 or 6 of these. All right, can't cook. I like that. All right, what are some others? Again, you guys can cheat, Google it. All right, so appreciate Amanda sharing. My dad wears tennis shoes with socks pulled all the way up. I will admit my dad does that. I have gotten around that, mostly because I hang around with you guys, so I don't do things that are too ridiculous. Okay, so we see that stereotype. Okay, so breadwinner. Okay, let's get 1 or 2 others, and we'll kind of break these down a little bit. Okay, so chiming in, dad's not being very smart with technology, very smart with kind of cell phones, knowing how to use them well. Okay, let's pick up one last one, mostly because I think these are entertaining. Okay, so dad's kind of being old school, so I definitely can be accused of that. If we think about these stereotypes and maybe others that you have, okay, what would you say are some positive stereotypes? Okay, so what are some either positive stereotypes that we listed or ones that you could think of? Okay, so again, what are some ones that you kind of feel like these are positive things? These are good things. Okay, so protective, loving is kind of a positive stereotype of dads. Okay, so even if you're imagining them getting the shotgun out when it's time to go out on a date and your date's coming up. I must admit, whoever dates Evie is in a lot of trouble between Katie and I both being psychologists. Okay, so being competitive can be seen as a positive stereotype. Okay, so they're trying to do the best they can, competing with others. Okay. All right, so the stereotype of kids kind of, or dads being out there playing ball with their kids, so being active with their kids is a positive stereotype. Okay, so I like that example. Okay. All right, so I like the idea here that we can say that the dad jokes are positive because they're trying to make people laugh. They're trying to be engaging and supporting and loving. So we can see that that's a positive stereotype. This handyman approach that the dads have of kind of always being able to fix things. So in our house, I fix all the jewelry. So Evie breaks something and then brings it to me and she says, I need this fixed. And so I actually have a full setup now. And so we have a lot of positive stereotypes about dads. And I think that's great. What would we say are maybe some negative stereotypes about dads? Okay, either ones that we've listed already or ones that you can think about. Okay, so we might have the negative stereotype that the dad's kind of the disengaged parent. So the parent's less likely to take the child to the doctor's office or kind of do a lot with the disciplining, things like that. So you can definitely see that happen. I know that I've gone places and it's, to take Evie to the doctor's office or something like that. And they're always very surprised that the dad's there. Or to pick up at daycare. This kind of seems like the surprise that the mom's not there, the dad's there. And so people kind of treat me differently because of that sometimes. Maybe a negative stereotype that the dads are kind of more focused on work instead of being with family. Okay, so they're kind of away all the time working. So that's a negative stereotype. Let's get maybe one or two other kind of negative stereotypes.
I feel like people assume that dads can't cook, but like in my case, actually, my mom is the one who's awful at cooking, and my dad is the one who can cook. So I feel like that's a negative stereotype that like people think that dads can't cook.
Okay. All right. So I love you adding that one. It's a negative stereotype that dads can't cook, but also starts to get at kind of the heart of stereotypes is that sometimes they're true. Okay. Sometimes it's not the dads that can cook well, but other times they're false. And so that's where we have to be kind of a bit careful with this. We also said that dads are the breadwinners, and that's a stereotype there, but that's not often the case. Okay. So it's not always the case that the dads are the breadwinner. It could be that the mother in this case is the one that's going out and earning the larger salary, and the dads are even in fact staying at home. Okay. So kind of flipping the roles. So part of the reason we start with this exercise is because it's entertaining for me as a dad. Okay, so I'm not gonna lie, it's one of the times I indulge a little bit in terms of what you guys think. But the other thing too that we can think about this is that there's both positive and negative stereotypes. When we talk about stereotyping, we will focus more on negative stereotypes about a group, but there's also positive stereotypes, so positive kind of ideas that come to mind once you think about someone as a member of a particular group. And so we want to keep that in mind when we talk about prejudice, discrimination, stereotypes, kind of how they function, where they have both kind of positive aspects and also negative aspects. We also kind of brought up too, and Cassie did a nice job with this, is kind of thinking about the fact that when we talk about stereotypes, they're not always true. And how that affects our judgment, our decision making, kind of the way that we process our social world around us. Okay, so kind of building off this exercise and thinking about things, what I want to do is kind of get us through our basic definitions, setting us up for where we can start really breaking down what stereotypes are and how they're important. So you guys kind of understand them already, but getting into more kind of a social psychology approach to it. And to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our ABCs of social psychology. So I told you guys we would start this up at the beginning of the semester, going back to affect, behavior, and cognition as our ABCs. And I have not let you down. I promise you have not strayed away from this. We are going to talk about it again. And the way we're going to talk about this is that affect and behavior and cognition are linked to three different components. Affect is linked to prejudice. Behavior is related to discrimination. And cognition is related to stereotypes. You guys were just doing social cognition. You were applying your cognitive beliefs. And so we know that each of these pieces are intertwined with each other, that the affect you're feeling, the way that you're thinking is then going to influence your behavior. You might look at your behavior to then infer how you feel about something. Same thing happens when we think about the ABCs related to prejudice, discrimination, and stereotyping. So the first piece here we talk about prejudice is feeling towards an individual based solely on group membership. Okay, so feeling towards an individual based solely on group membership. And the idea here is that once we have identified individuals being part of a group, we now have an affective response to that. Okay, so we might feel positive, we might feel negative. There's also research showing that there's a bit of ambivalence, where it's kind of maybe a combination of both this positive, negative affect, where you're kind of trying to balance it out. And so when we think about this prejudice, again, once we identify someone as being part of a group, that group has an affective response that you have towards it. And remember, this is helpful for us because our affect then guides our behavior. So we get to our second part here, behavior being related to discrimination. Discrimination in this case is unequal treatment of different people based on a group or category. So unequal treatment of different people based on a group or category. And oftentimes we think about this as negative treatment, so discrimination. So we see this as someone being less likely to be hired because they're a minority group member. Okay, they're an out-group member, which we'll define here in a little bit. We see discrimination occurring now because towards Asian Americans because of the coronavirus, the idea that they're responsible for it, so they're treated negatively simply because they're a member of that group. Obviously, Asian American United States had nothing to do with this. Okay, they're as much a victim as everyone else is. Okay, but that discrimination occurs. We also see too that with our cognitions, again, our thought processes, our thinking, that this is related to our stereotypes. Okay, so our stereotypes here are beliefs that associate groups of people with certain traits. So beliefs that associate groups of people with certain traits. So the idea here is that once a person's been identified as being part of a group, they then have certain beliefs that then instantly come to mind about that particular group. Okay, so some of my favorite things related to this is talking about college football. And you talk about different fan bases, and everyone has kind of an instant response to it. So you'll get fan bases like Nebraska, okay, or even Iowa. So I've been to Iowa game. We actually upset Iowa in Iowa City, some years ago when I was in college. And one of the things that was distinct about that is that that particular group you felt positive towards. They were very nice to their fans. Yeah, they're very much there for the game, but willing to be very supportive and kind to visitors. They didn't discriminate, so you didn't see a kind of harsh treatment. And the stereotypes then that you had of Iowa fans were that they were, good people. And that was kind of the association we had. I'll walk you through an experience that I have to kind of highlight each of these different pieces. One of the things I always find to be really interesting and distinct is when someone comes out to my house to repair the house, or I'm trying to buy something, kind of a larger ticket item, and they ask me what I do, kind of passing conversation, maybe just to learn a little bit more about me. And I tell them I'm a professor at Ohio State. And you can instantly see these ABCs kicking in right away. Okay, so you instantly get this affective reaction. And what I always see consistently is that people then feel more positively towards me. Okay, so there's a strong presence of Ohio State here. Ohio State is viewed favorably. So I get this positive affective response. So just saying I'm a member of Ohio State, brings forth something positive. So I could be a total jerk, as you guys know I am already. Okay? But the idea here is that simply because I'm part of this group, they feel positive towards me. We also see that discrimination occurs because of that. Now, in Ohio, I often see positive discrimination. Okay, so I get unequal treatment, but they treat me nicer. I suddenly see them kind of being more willing to kind of make deals or to repair things a little bit differently or with less cost because I'm part of this group. And the last piece I love is especially related to cognitions. And so again, this is beliefs that are associated with groups of people that have certain traits. And so when I tell people I'm a psychology professor especially, they suddenly believe that I do psychoanalysis. Okay, so all psychology professors are actually just sitting there psychoanalyzing you, evaluating you. Maybe you guys get this experience as well as you talk about being a psych major. You share something about being a psych major, they say, oh, you must be psychoanalyzing me right now. Okay. So in fact, I had this happen. I'll share kind of a bit of an embarrassing story. I was with my roommate, Elizabeth. She is just starting dating this guy, Sean. Elizabeth introduced me to Sean. I said I was a psychology graduate student. And he says, oh, you must be analyzing every move I make right now. He's like, you must be psychoanalyzing me. And I think we had been drinking. And so I couldn't help myself. I said, yes, I have been analyzing you. and you're clearly compensating for a small penis. Which, you know, totally threw off my college roommate, Elizabeth, who was like, oh my God, did he really say that? Sean had like this look of like horror on his face, like what had he done? Needless to say, they got married, they have kids, we still see them all the time. That's still one of my favorite stories to kind of share in terms of how this cognition comes out. Okay, so again, it's kind of this stereotypic belief, though, that psychologists are all doing the psychoanalysis. And so, in fact, you guys are well aware that that's not the case. But again, this comes back to, you know, how we categorize someone in group starts to influence how we feel towards them, the way we behave towards them. Okay, are we giving them the same kind of credit as we might others, give them the same kind of opportunities, and the beliefs that we have about that group. So let me pause here for just a minute because we laid out some fundamental pieces that we'll be building on. If you're taking stereotyping and prejudice with me, we actually spend almost a whole day talking about this. Let me pause to see if you have any questions before we'll start asking a next general question to you guys. All right. So if you have a question, just jump in with it. But here's a question for you guys. Is stereotyping bad? Okay, so I want you guys to share with me either over chat or kind of jumping in. Is stereotyping bad? Remember, going back to that stereotype, you know, having beliefs about individuals because they're part of a group. Is stereotyping bad? Is it good? What are kind of assessment of this? Because we'll see that we're going to kind of unpack this thinking as we go along. Okay, or at least unpack this question, kind of processing a bit more. Okay, so do you find stereotyping to be bad? Can it have positive qualities to it? Is it kind of a mix? What is kind of your assessment when we stop and think about this question of stereotyping being bad? Because usually we assume that it is, but, you know, kind of processing it, you know, where could it be bad? Where could it be potentially something beneficial for us?
I think it can be a little bit of both. Like, I think if it's like a positive stereotype, it might like boost your self-esteem. But on the opposite side, if it's like a negative stereotype, it might like decrease your self-esteem. So like, I think I wouldn't say like it's good or bad, but I just think it depends on like the situation.
Okay, so it's a great response, kind of very balanced in terms of the processing of it. It very well could be that, you know, in different situations, that stereotype is a boost to you. Okay, so a stereotype, you know, we'll go back to our definition here, or at least we'll try to just a second. You know, if we go back to think about it, you know, having positive beliefs associated with being an Ohio State, you know, faculty member is a good thing. Makes me feel good when people bring it up. But in certain contexts, though, it can actually be kind of negative. Okay, maybe in cases where I'm an out-group member. Okay, so maybe there's a little bit of both of to it. Okay, other thoughts. Okay, so I know we got some response here on chat. I think it'd be good and bad, but I do think it's a fast way that we process information about things, people around us. So it's like a mental shortcut. I think that's another kind of piece that addresses kind of this balance, is that we know with mental shortcuts that it helps us not have to think. So this is a great response, but also at the same time too, when we take these shortcuts, we don't get the best responses either. So, you know, I've thought about this in terms of context of, you know, when I'm out for a run and I see a college student driving through campus and I need to cross the street and I apply the stereotype of them being bad drivers, you know, that's actually, you know, something that's good for me to do because I didn't think about it too hard, especially when I'm in a moment of deciding if I can go across the street or not. And that's, you know, potentially protective. We have another chat response I'll share. I don't think it's necessarily bad, but it's not good to stereotype people in a negative way before you get to know them. But it's somewhat human nature to stereotype whether it's good or bad. I think that's what the piece I want to kind of carry us with, that last piece there, is that, you know, what somewhat human nature to stereotype. And I think that's what we're kind of emphasize kind of going forward here. And I want you to keep this in mind as we address kind of this overarching question: is stereotyping bad? And we can think about it bad in terms of its functionality. We can think about it in terms of its consequences. Okay? We can think about it kind of what it does for us. Okay? So unpacking this idea, unpacking especially that last statement, which was a great one, let's get back into a couple more definitions that we need to have, some of which we've kind of been talking about already. So the first definition we need to have is our in-group and out-group. And the in-group simply is the group that which you're part of. The out-group is someone that is a group of people that you're separate from. Okay, so you can say that you're an in-group of intro to social psychology students, okay? And an out-group would be, you know, my social lab students or my intro to psychology students. Okay, so they're a different group that you're not part of. But you also can see how in-group and out-group can switch. We can talk about in-group being all of Ohio State students, of which those 2 classes I just listed you now be part of, versus that out-group as another university. One of the things I love about being a graduate from 2 other Big Ten institutions and been teaching another Big Ten institution is that in-group, out-groups for me become this huge mess, especially around college football time. Okay, so which in-group am I part of? Which out-group, is the other group? How do they shift over the course of the season? When we're playing different teams, we're playing against, each other. Northwestern plays Ohio State, Northwestern plays Purdue. So how do you kind of draw these connections? So one of the key pieces, though, is that one of the things we think about primarily with groups is we think about as either an in-group or an out-group. Okay, so an in-group, you're either kind of with me, you're part of my group, okay? Or an out-group, meaning that you are seen as kind of separate. Now, with this, okay, one of the key things that happens is we start to have what we call an out-group homogeneity bias. Okay. So an out-group homogeneity bias is this bias that we have that we see in-group members as being distinct and having their own unique characteristics, whereas we see those out-group members are all similar to each other. Okay, it may not necessarily that they're all negatively seen, but they're all seen as kind of having the same characteristics. Okay, so I go to a football game. My in-group member is Ohio State students, and I see the students that are there for the game because they're really passionate. Some that are there for the social aspects. Some that are there because they got free tickets and they're just kind of checking out. First time season, first time visitors to games. Things like that. I see all kinds of variety. I think about all the kind of different personalities of Ohio State fans, and then I see the out group, the Purdue fans, and they're all just the same. They're all just kind of crappy fans whose team is losing. Okay, so suddenly they lose all distinct characteristics. And in fact, we even see this in terms of how we perceive out-group members. So when we look at our own in-group, we can see distinctions in terms of kind of different aspects of ethnicity, facial features, other characteristics. When we look at that out-group, we actually see them as all being similar to each other. So in fact, I'll even notice when watching TV shows that when I watch other white actors and actresses, I can kind of tell the characters more easily who's playing what role and whatnot. But for out-group members, I've noticed different times I get the characters confused. And so this might be kind of an example of a reflection of this out-group homogeneity bias that, the out-group members, minority group members, I lose track of which character is who. But for those in-group members, it's easier. Other white actors and actresses, I'm able to kind of distinguish them. I kind of be able to track them a bit better. Now, I'll continue on with kind of other basic definitions. The next definition that we'll break down is stigma. And then after I get through this slide, I'll pause again. Okay. So a stigma is some type of attribute that's deeply discrediting. Okay. And deeply discrediting, meaning that that person's seen as less human, having less value, having kind of less worth. Okay, so stigma is an attribute that is deeply discrediting. So you might have had this experience. You say, oh, I'm a psychology student. Someone says, oh, I won't hold that against you. Okay, the idea being that, being a psychology student is somehow stigmatizing, meaning that you're kind of discrediting you as being kind of less qualified. And when we think about stigma, we think about it as kind of 3 different types. Okay, so this goes back to Erving Goffman's work. So he did some of the original work on stigma. In fact, as an undergraduate, my undergraduate thesis was related to stigma. It's related to mental illness stigma. And when we talk about the different types of stigma, we can think about it first as the abomination of the body. Okay, so physical deformities. One of the classic examples Erving Goffman starts off with, and I apologize I don't have his book with me, otherwise I'd read it for you word for word, is a letter, kind of a Dear Abby letter from about a 16-year-old girl. And she has a facial deformity where she doesn't have a fully developed nose. And she talks about how her parents are very loving, very caring. They take care of her, they dress her up. She feels very pretty, other than the fact that she has this physical deformity. And that none of the boys will have anything to do with her. A lot of people won't interact with her because of this physical deformity. And so you see that she experiences this stigma. The stigma is so discrediting that she ends her letter saying, "Ought I kill myself?" And she feels so negative about this stigma, And it's so harmful to her that she raises this question. So the first piece here was have that abominations of the body, so the physical deformity. Okay, so this can be some type of visual handicap. It could be loss of limb. It could be some type of burn mark, things like that. The second is a blemish of individual characteristics. Okay, so our blemish of individual character here might be someone who's perceived as weak-willed. Okay, so this is where we start to see that this individual character is related to things like mental illness. Okay, so as individuals stigmatized, they're seen as less credible because they don't have the ability to kind of take care of themselves. They can't just pick themselves up by their bootstraps and continue on if they're having difficulties. Our last type of stigma is a tribal stigma of race, nation, or religion. And this is where we see the stigmatization of individuals because of their different ethnicity. They have maybe different religious or cultural backgrounds. They come from a different nation. And so this also is a mark where we see these individuals being discredited. This idea here is that anyone that doesn't really kind of fit this overall kind of prototype that we have for the cultural norm, okay, starts to be kind of discredited in terms of experiencing the stigma. And the stigma is a way to kind of make an individual feel more excluded, okay, to kind of put them in a lower status position. So let me pause here because we've outlined kind of several basic definitions. We'll be able to move away from definitions here in just a moment, but I'll make sure that we're set on these concepts. So ask a question. If you're in chat, go ahead and jump in, tell me if you're good or not. I want to pause here for just a moment, make sure that we're set, because these are key pieces I want to make sure that we're clear on, because we'll be coming back to them over and over again. Okay, so either ask questions, give me feedback, let me know if you guys are in good shape. All right, feedback I'm getting is you guys are doing well. I appreciate you guys staying with it. We're kind of setting the table for a couple of things here, so I appreciate you kind of being on top of it. All right, so let's start working in terms of kind of understanding what happens with these stereotypes, what happens with these kind of beliefs that we have. And Susan Fisk offers what we call this kind of warmth competency model of stereotypes. And when we talk about this warmth competency model, basically there's two underlying dimensions of stereotypes. Remember those beliefs that we have about individuals just because they're part of a group. And one of the dimensions that she argues individuals have is an evaluation of warmth towards that group. Okay, so this warmth being kind of how kind that group is, supportive, socially engaging, loving, caring. You can think about individuals high in warmth such as grandparents. Okay, maybe you might deem your parents as kind of being high in warmth, where they're really kind of nurturing and caring about you, versus you might say someone low in warmth might be an instructor. Okay, in some cases where they're, especially like a drill sergeant, where they're just trying to, make sure that you're doing things correctly. Okay, you might say a boss is low in warmth, where they're not really compassionate and caring, they kind of just want things done well. The other dimension that Fisk offers, this idea of competence and intelligence. So we're evaluating someone based on their group membership, the stereotype that we have. We evaluate them as how competent they are. Okay, so how good are they at their job, how intelligent, how smart they are, they're calculated, they're able to be successful with problem solving. Okay, they're able to kind of process and think things through. That's really the other dimension that Susan Fisk thinks about in terms of competence or intelligence. Okay, so you might say an individual high in competence and intelligence might be a professor. So I told you guys I'm narcissistic, so I have to go with that one right away as an example. We might say someone who's a CEO of a company, a government official. You might say that they're higher in competence or intelligence. Okay, so inventors, high in competence and intelligence. We can also think of groups that are low in competence or intelligence. Okay, so you might think of individuals with mental handicaps, younger children as kind of being lower in competence. Some of you are suggesting dads, especially with technology, might be seen as kind of lower in competence or intelligence related to technology. And what Fisk contends with these two dimensions is that we get kind of different responses to these different groups. Okay, so she says, well, hey, we can start grouping these type of groups, so we can put these groups into different categories based on these two dimensions. Okay, so if we look at our table here, we can think of individuals starting first with kind of low in competence and low in warmth as being poor blacks, Arabs, welfare recipients. We see individuals who are homeless are seen as cold, Okay, so they're not very outgoing, sociable, caring, and they're low in competence. On the other end of the spectrum, kind of going on in a diagonal here, we see those that are seen as both high in warmth and high in competence include housewives, Christians, Irish, middle class, Americans, Black professionals, where they're seen as being have a high level of intelligence, able to problem solve, but they're also warm and caring. Okay, so they're able to support others. They, concerned about the interaction. For those who are intelligent but low in warmth, we see this as rich, Asians, Jews, British, or whites. Okay, so these are some of the categories. And the opposite of individuals who are high in warmth but low in competence would be elderly, retarded individuals, individuals with mental handicaps, or disabled individuals. So with, the idea was she looked at kind of multiple groups and saw this kind of natural clustering. Now you can say, okay, well, great. We've kind of taken some of these social groups, we've kind of put them together based on these two dimensions. Okay, that's nice. Well, why does it matter? Why is this important? And from this model, we see is that the response to each of these groups based on their competency and warmth is different. So emotional reactions or prejudice comes from these dimensions is what she's arguing. Okay, so she says individuals who are high in competency and high in warmth, you have a positive feeling towards them. Okay, so part of the reason why I may get a positive response, that positive affect when I tell others I'm an Ohio State professor, is I'm viewed high in competency. Okay, so I'm seen as highly intelligent, able to think things through. Okay. Clearly the joke is on whoever's working with me because that's totally not the case. But I'm also deemed as maybe as a professor as high in warmth. Okay, so I'm teaching others, concerned about their well-being, wanting them to do well. So you might say that that's a demonstration of warmth. Individuals high in competency, okay, so again, rich, Asian, some of those groups that we talked about, but low in warmth, we have an envious response. Okay, so, oh, they're great, they're intelligent, maybe they're making a lot of money, I'm envious of them, I don't really have this positive warm feeling towards them, so it allows me to kind of feel negative towards them. Individuals who are low in competency and low in warmth, okay, so those individuals such as homeless, okay, these individuals are seen with contempt. Okay, they're seen as having a dislike towards these individuals. And because of this, those individuals may be treated more negatively. And lastly, those low in competency, so they're not very intelligent, not able to critically problem solve, take care of themselves in some regard, but high in warmth in terms of the fact that they're caring, supportive, they want to have positive social interactions with you, you might feel pity towards them. And what we know with each of these responses is that they're going to change the way that we evaluate, interact with that person. Okay, so if we feel pity for someone, we might be more sympathetic towards them, provide them more warmth and comfort, be there to take care of them. If you feel contempt towards a particular individual because they're part of a group, you're not going to help them, you're not going to support them, you feel negative towards them. And so again, with each of these emotions is tied to behavior. Yes, you might discriminate, you might act more negatively towards them, and also then is tied that affective response that we have here, and then along with it, this cognitions. Okay, so our stereotypes we have, the way that we're going to process thinking about each of these groups. Okay, so that's one way that we'll see that we kind of organize where this prejudice comes from is evaluating groups and individuals within these groups based on these two dimensions. Okay, we'll actually see that to some degree, it's a little bit more simple than that. But let me pause at this point to see what questions you have before I start kind of building some of the foundations of why we see this intergroup conflict, why we see this prejudice discrimination occurring. All right. So when we think about things, we can think about Fisk's model, okay, with warmth and competency, but we can also see to some degree too that part of what happens with our prejudice, discrimination, stereotyping is based on Sharif's idea of a realistic group conflict theory. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through this theory and walk you through Sharif's Robbers Cave study, which is a classic study demonstrating this idea of realistic conflict. So the idea is that part of our response to others, part of our negative response to outgroup members, it occurs when there's competition over scarce resources that leads to intergroup hostility and conflict. So there's competition over scarce resources that leads to intergroup hostility and conflict. So the thought process here, according to Sharif, is to say, okay, oops, sorry guys, is to say that, hey, there's certain things that we only have a limited number of. Okay, so there's only a limited number of jobs. Okay. Apparently there's only a limited number of toilet paper, at least at some point. Okay. There's a limited number of economic resources, okay, a limited number of housing. And when that competition becomes stronger over these scarce resources, Sharif argues that this is where we start to think negatively towards that outgroup. Okay, so we start to discriminate against them. Okay, start to give them less quality positions in a company. We think negatively towards them to kind of justify our negative behavior towards them to some degrees. Okay. And that stereotypes, you start thinking more negatively. Our cognitions are more negative. And so what this does is that this produces this idea of hostility and conflict. Okay, so we start to see a lot of this kind of realistic group conflict theory occurring, especially related to immigration theories, okay, immigration arguments, where we're starting to say, well, immigrants are coming to the United States, taking this limited resources of jobs and welfare. And because of this, then this starts opening up these this idea of this conflict occurring. So now there can be kind of more negative stereotypes towards the group, more discrimination, kind of more negative affective response to it. And this is how Sharif made his argument. Okay? And he did this kind of classic study that I think is really unique. It's a really unique social psychology study. This kind of thing doesn't happen really at all. But he was able to kind of demonstrate this theory. So what Sharif did in 1954 is he had a group of, I believe it was middle schoolers. I believe that's the right age group. And they were all white from a relatively, reasonably social status. Okay, so good socioeconomic status group. And they took them out to a camp. Okay, so it's like a summer camp that you might imagine. And in this summer camp, what they did is they went through several different stages. Okay, so first they divided the boys into two groups. And again, these boys are all, equivalent in terms of mental health, very similar to each other between these two groups. And they let them form kind of in groups. Okay, so they had activities where they were within their own kind of subset of a group where they were identifying themselves. So it was the Eagles and the Rattlers, so they gave themselves names. They interacted with other in-group members. They, did activities together. So you can kind of imagine that they start off with just kind of this experience of kind of just forming this group of, I think, about 10 kids. Now, this in-group formation, again, kind of reflects this realistic group conflict theory and the fact that we, again, have in-groups versus out-groups. So in this case, trying to build up this strong in-group identity when, again, these kids are just meeting each other. They then introduce friction. Okay, so partly through this experiment, they then made each group aware of each other. Okay, so up until this moment, the two groups didn't know about each other. And part of what they did when the friction phase occurs is they started to have limited resources. Okay, so they had a baseball diamond, and the two groups played each other for kind of rights to the baseball diamond. Rights to dessert. Okay, who got to eat first? Okay. They started to introduce these limited resources, and what they found is that these kids that were relatively happy, okay, not causing problems, relatively kind to each other, started to be rather abusive to the outgroup members. Okay, so at one point, they were stealing each other's flags and burning them. Okay. They went through and ransacked each other's dorms, so kind of tossing their dorms. They were getting into food fights, physical fights. Again, these are kids that have no reason to be abusive to each other. But suddenly when you introduce this friction, where groups could win money for different competitions, that suddenly they started thinking negatively towards each other. And so this is where we start to see the affect became more negative, that prejudice became, the affect that prejudice became more negative. They were more negative stereotyping the outgroup members, and they were discriminating in terms of being abusive towards the other group. Now, Sharif said, well, hey, what can we do to reduce this friction? And what he did with this particular aspect of this Robbers Cave study was he introduced an integration phase. And what he did specifically here was what we talk about as a superordinate goal. So superordinate goal is kind of a larger goal that individuals will have that they all have to kind of start working towards. So the idea was, he said, hey, to reduce this friction, we need to get them all working together, because he had put them together originally and said, hey, be nice to each other, let's integrate. And he found that that was only making things worse. So simply putting the two groups together wasn't resolving the problem. And so what they did is they did things like they plugged a water line, and both groups had to work together to understand what had happened to this water line to fix it so they had water to their camp. Okay? At one point, their bus broke down. Okay, so they all had to work together to push the bus in order to get the bus going again. And what they argued is that through this integration, through the superordinate phase, that the groups actually were able to combine and come back together again. So in fact, they talked about how on the bus ride home, back to their homes, that the groups, sat with each other, that the group that had won more money traded for ice cream for the group that had won less money. Sounds kind of very kumbaya at the end. Who knows how much it was really that case, kind of maybe they exaggerated a little bit. But the idea is by working together, they formed kind of a larger group. And in fact, I think if nothing else, thinking about Sharif studies, we see this happen all the time. Okay, so we'll see groups that are in disagreement with each other, suddenly coming together when there's a larger overall goal. Okay, so I was watching Thomas the Tank Engine with Evie one day. And in Thomas the Tank Engine, there's a distinct difference between the steamies and the diesels. Okay, so let me give you this quick rundown, because I'm sure you're not well versed in Thomas the Tank Engine at this point. Okay, so the diesels are kind of these grungy trains that are kind of doing the dirty work, moving coal around, moving resources around. And the steamies are these classic steam engines that pull the passengers, and they're kind of the glorious trains. And they don't get along with each other, right? So there's they're not nice to each other. They say negative things about each other. But then in this particular episode, a plane is flying into the newly built runway. And unfortunately, this water tower, for some reason, has fallen over the runway, damaged the runway, is in the way, and a plane is coming in. And literally, as I'm watching this, I'm going in the back of my head, I was like, here comes the superordinate goal. Suddenly, the steamies and the diesels are going to get along with each other. Okay, and sure enough, Thomas the Tank Engine, the epitome of a steamy, goes to this grumpy diesel engine and says, I need your help. The diesel engine comes over and moves the water tower, the steamies help with whatever piece of it, and suddenly they all work together. Okay, so I realize it's a ridiculous story. We're kind of going into kids' TV shows, but it reflects this idea of kind of these groups coming together for a superordinate goal. And that's where I want you to kind of keep an eye on things with the COVID virus to see how much of this occurs, how much you start to see differences go away between groups, because everyone's kind of working on this higher order goal. Okay, so the superordinate goal. So let me pause at this point to see if any questions about this Robbers Cave study, because it's a very classic social psychology study. It's one that researchers built quite a bit out of for this particular study, plus it's a very kind of interesting way that they approached it. So let me pause. If you guys are good to go, just let me know, but I want to take just a moment here. All right, I think we're good. So, we talked about kind of different ways of thinking about groups. We talked about warmth and competency. We thought about kind of the foundation for why prejudice in intergroup conflict occurs is this realistic group conflict theory. Another way that we can think about it, kind of building on this realistic group conflict theory, is what we call a minimal groups approach. So Tajfel looks at Sharif's study and says, hey, how do we come up with some situation where there's an in-group, out-group, and there's no distinction? You're not going to treat that out-group any differently. Okay, so in the case of Sharif's study, he had to kind of build up this in-group formation. He then had to put these limited resources together so that the groups had to compete for him. Is this all necessary, to produce this conflict between these groups? And so Tajfel says, well, hey, let's come up with this idea of arbitrary assignment to groups where there really is no meaning behind these groups. Okay, so there's really no inherent understanding. You haven't formed an in-group. And so he does things like labeling individuals as overestimators or underestimators. So actually, Zach, my research thesis student, is actually going to use this paradigm for a study. Okay, so actually meeting with him this afternoon to talk about it. So they basically flashed a whole bunch of dots on a screen and asked participants to make an estimate of how many dots were on the screen. So it's called dot estimation task. And basically what they did is through random assignments said, hey, you either overestimated the number of dots or underestimated it. Okay, so it wasn't actual wasn't that they were actually doing this, they just randomly assigned participants. And because there were so many dots on the screen, there's no way to know if you're really overestimating or underestimating. They do several trials of this. It's very ambiguous, trust me. And so they do this task, and the argument here is that no one's really thought of themselves as an overestimator or an underestimator. Okay? You might have thought about, hey, I tend to overestimate something, but you don't really identify with this characteristic. It's not something central to who you are. And what they found is that even with this very random, arbitrary assignment to groups, that there was in-group favoritism and out-group derogation. Okay, so groups groups felt more positively about their fellow group members. So let's say I'm randomly assigned to be an underestimator. I feel more positively towards myself as an underestimator and other underestimators compared to overestimators. Something I never thought about before, something totally arbitrary, suddenly now has this meaning where I'm feeling more positive towards my own group and feeling more negative and derogating that outgroup. That outgroup homogeneity bias that we talked about, just a little while ago, also starts to kick in with these arbitrary assignments. I'm able to see kind of distinctions between other fellow underestimators, but I see all the overestimators being very similar to each other, lose these distinct characteristics. I think what's especially interesting to see here is that there's even a biased resource allocation. So participants are given the opportunity to share money, spread money. And what they found in these experiments is that participants were willing to take less money. They were willing to lose money themselves to make sure that outgroup didn't get money. Okay, so if they gave more money to that outgroup, they could then get more money themselves. But because they disliked that outgroup so much, they were willing to take kind of a loss of their own money to make sure that that outgroup didn't get any money. And so we see this as kind of really being this distinct, characteristic. And in fact, researchers have tried in several different dimensions to eliminate this in-group, out-group favoritism with these minimal groups. Okay, so they've tried other random things in terms of what type of art you like. They've done it by whether you live on the east or west side of the Mississippi, which usually isn't something that, you go around saying that, I'm a east of the Mississippian. Okay, you might say you're a Buckeye or, from your Ohio State, resident of Ohio, Ohioan, but you don't say, I'm an east of the Mississippian. Okay, you talk about East Coast, West Coast, but we don't talk about it in terms of Mississippi. And so one of the classic examples of this minimal group, is the blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiment. Okay, so raise your hand. How many of you have heard of this experiment before? Okay, so a few people are responding. Maybe a couple of those that don't have your camera up kind of heard about this. Okay? And the whole idea behind this was to demonstrate how, especially with kids, how you could create this in-group, out-group favoritism through something totally arbitrary. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a video summary of this particular experiment, this kind of class exercise. And what I want you to do is I want you to kind of note the things that surprised you the most about this in-group, out-group response, and how the teacher generated this in-group, out-group favoritism. So I'm going to go to the video. Let me know right away if for some reason you're not hearing it, but watch it carefully again for looking at this arbitrary assignment of groups and how the students are responding in this particular case. Okay, so give me just a moment to get us switched over to a different screen. All right, again, I'll play the video here. If you're not hearing it, please let me know.
This is a special week. Does anybody know what it is?
National Brotherhood.
National Brotherhood Week. What's brotherhood?
Be kind to your brothers. Be kind.
Okay, be kind to your brothers.
Like you would like to be treated.
Treat everyone the way you would like to be treated. Treat everyone as though he was your brother. And is there anyone in this United States that we do not treat as our brothers?
Yes.
Who?
Yeah,
The black people. Who else?
All right, hang on, guys. For some reason, it looks like it's not playing.
Does anybody know what it is?
National Brotherhood.
National Brotherhood Week. What's brotherhood?
Be kind to your brothers. Be kind.
Okay, be kind to your brothers.
Like you would like to be treated.
Treat everyone the way you would like to be treated. Treat everyone as though he was your brother. And is there anyone in this United States that we do not treat as our brothers?
Yes.
Who?
Yeah.
The black people. Who else? Absolutely, the Indians. And when many people see a black person or a yellow person or a red person, what do they think?
Look at that. Dumb people.
They look at the dumb people. What else do they think sometimes? What kinds of things do they say about black people?
Call them niggers.
In the city, many places in the United States, how are black people treated? How are Indians treated? How are people who are of a different color than we are treated?
They're part of this world. They don't get anything in this world.
Why is that?
Because they're different color.
You think you know how that would feel to be judged by the color of your skin?
Yeah.
Do you think you do? No, I don't think you'd know how that felt unless you had been through it, would you? It might be interesting to judge people today by the color of their eyes. Would you like to try this?
Yeah.
Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Since I'm the teacher and I have blue eyes, I think maybe the blue-eyed people should be on top the first day.
Up here?
I mean, the blue-eyed people are the better people in this room. Oh, yes, they are. Blue-eyed people are smarter than brown-eyed people.
My dad isn't that stupid.
Is your dad brown-eyed?
Yeah.
One day you came to school and you told us that he kicked you.
He did.
Do you think a blue-eyed father would kick his son?
Yeah. My
dad's blue-eyed. He's never kicked me. Greg's dad is blue-eyed. He's never kicked him. Rex's dad is blue-eyed. He's never kicked him. This is a fact. Blue-eyed people are better than brown-eyed people. Are you brown-eyed or blue-eyed?
No.
Why are you shaking your head?
I don't know.
Are you sure that you're right? Why? What makes you so sure that you're right?
I don't know.
The blue-eyed people get 5 extra minutes of recess, while the brown-eyed people have to stay in. The brown-eyed people do not get to use the drinking fountain. You'll have to use the paper cups. You brown-eyed people are not to play with the blue-eyed people on the playground because you are not as good as blue-eyed people. Well, the brown-eyed people in this room today are going to wear collars so that we can tell from a distance what color your eyes are. On page 127. 127. Is everyone ready? Everyone but Laurie. Ready, Laurie?
Brown-eyed.
She's a brown-eyed. You'll begin to notice today that we spend a great deal of time waiting for brown-eyed people. The yardstick's gone. Well, okay. I don't see the yardstick, do you?
It's probably over there. Hey, Miss Psych, you better keep that on your desk so if the brown-eyed people get out of hand.
Oh, you think if the brown-eyed people get out of hand, that would be the thing to use? Who goes first to lunch?
Blue-eyed.
The blue-eyed people. No brown-eyed people go back for seconds. Blue-eyed people may go back for seconds. Brown-eyed people do not.
Brown-eyed.
Don't you know?
They're not smart.
Is that the only reason?
They'll take too much.
It might take too much. Okay, quietly.
And it seemed like when we were down on the bottom, everything bad was happening to us.
The way they treated you, you felt like you didn't even want to try to do anything.
It seemed like Mrs. Elliott was taking our best friends away from us.
What happened happened at recess? Were two of you boys fighting?
Yeah. Russell and John were.
What happened, John?
Russell called me names and I hit him in the gut.
What did he call you?
Brown eyes.
Did you call him brown eyes?
They always call us that. Craig and all of the boys call us brown eyes. They say, come here, brown eyes. And they were calling us blue eyes. I wasn't. Sandy and Donna were. Yeah.
What's wrong with being called brown eyes?
It means that we're stupider. Well, not that, but
Oh, that's just the same way as other people calling black people niggers. Yeah.
Is that the reason you hit him, John? Did it help? Did it stop him? Did it make you feel better inside?
Stop Russell.
Make you feel better inside? Did it make you feel better to call him brown eyes? Why do you suppose you call him brown eyes?
Right, because he has brown eyes.
Is that the only reason? He didn't call him brown eyes yesterday and he had brown eyes yesterday. Didn't he?
Because we get started. Yeah, ever since you put those blue things on there. Tease them. Kind of tease them.
Oh, is this teasing?
No. Well, he did it.
Were you doing it for fun, to be funny, or were you doing it to be mean? I don't know. Don't ask me. Did anyone laugh at you when you did it?
I watched what had been marvelous, cooperative, wonderful, thoughtful children turn into nasty, vicious, discriminating little third graders in a space of 15 minutes.
Yesterday, I told you that brown-eyed people aren't as good as blue-eyed people. That wasn't true. I lied to you yesterday. The truth is that brown-eyed people are better than blue-eyed people. Russell, where are your glasses?
I forgot them.
You forgot them. And what color are your eyes?
Blue.
Susan Ginder has brown eyes. She didn't forget her glasses.
Yeah.
Russell Ring has blue eyes, and what about his glasses?
He forgot them.
He forgot them. Yesterday we were visiting and Greg said, "Boy, I like to hit my little sister as hard as I can. That's fun." What does that tell you about blue-eyed people?
They're naughty. In fact, they fight a lot.
The brown-eyed people may take off their collars, and each of you may put your collar on a blue-eyed person. The brown-eyed people get 5 extra minutes of recess. You blue-eyed people are not allowed to be on the playground equipment at any time. You blue-eyed people are not to play with the brown-eyed people. Brown-eyed people are better than blue-eyed people. They're smarter than blue-eyed people. And if you don't believe it, look at Brian. Do blue-eyed people know how to sit in a chair? Very sad. Very, very sad. Who can tell me what contraction should be in the first sentence? Go to the board and write it, John. Come on, let's do it again. Loosen up. Up, up, up. Come on. That's better. Now, do you know how to make a W? Okay, write the contraction for we are. Now that's beautiful writing. Is that better?
Yeah.
Brown-eyed people learn fast, don't they?
Yeah.
Boy, do brown-eyed people learn fast. Very good. Greg, what did you do with that cup? Will you please go and get that cup and put your name on it and keep it at your desk? Blue-eyed people are wasteful. Okay, you want to be timed this morning?
Yeah. A.
I use Orton Gillingham Phonics. We use the card pack. And the children, the brown-eyed children, were in the low class the first day, and it took them 5.5 minutes to get through the card pack. The second day, it took them 2.5 minutes. The only thing that had changed was the fact that now they were superior people. You went faster than I've ever had anyone go through the card pack. Why couldn't you get them yesterday?
We had those collars on.
You think the collars kept you?
Just keep thinking about those collars.
Oh.
And I kept get rolling around.
Oh, and you couldn't think as well with the collars on. 4 minutes and 18 seconds.
I knew we weren't going to make it.
How long did it take you yesterday?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. How long did it take you today?
4 minutes and 18 seconds.
What happened?
One down.
Why? What were you thinking of?
This.
I hate today.
How do you do? I hate too.
Because I'm blue-eyed.
See, I am too.
There's nothing, it's not funny, it's not fun, it's not pleasant. This is a filthy, nasty word called discrimination. We're treating people a certain way because they are different from the rest of us. Is that fair?
No.
Nothing fair about it. We didn't say this was going to be a fair day, did we?
No.
And it isn't. It's a horrid day. Okay, you ready? What did you people who are wearing blue collars now find out today?
Oh, yeah.
I know what they felt like yesterday.
I did too.
How did they feel yesterday?
Down.
Like a dog on a leash.
Yeah.
It feels like a chain
them up
wherever you go.
into prison. Like you're chaining them up into prison. Like you're shutting up and you're throwing the key away.
Should the color of some other person's eyes have anything to do with how you treat them?
No.
All right, then should the color of their skin?
No.
Should you judge people by the color of their skin?
No.
You're going to say that today and this week and probably all the time you're in this room. You'll say, "No, Mrs. Elliott." Every time I ask that question.
No.
Then,
No, Mrs. Dillon.
when you see a black man or an Indian or someone walking down the street, are you going to say, "Look at that silly looking thing"?
No.
Does it make any difference whether their skin is black or white?
No.
Or yellow?
No.
Or red?
No.
Is that how you decide whether people are good or bad?
No.
Is that what makes people good or bad?
No.
Let's take these collars off.
Hey, don't stick yourself down there. You'd have to sort Mr. Valley, you can
What would you like to do with them?
throw them away.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Mrs. Ellen. Don't eat them like
Now you know a little bit more than you knew at the beginning of this week?
Yes. A lot.
Do you know a little bit more than you wanted to?
Yes.
This isn't an easy way to learn this, is it?
No, Miss.
Oh, well, you stop. Okay, now let's all sit down here together. Blue eyes and brown eyes. Does it make any difference what color you are?
No.
Down, girl.
Don't forget to see you again.
Oh, you found your friend, huh? Now, did you get back? Okay, you ready to listen now? Okay, now are you back?
Yes.
That feel better?
Yes.
Does the color of eyes that you have make any difference in the kind of person you are?
No, Mrs. Valley.
Does that feel like being home again, girls?
Yes.
Oh, well, you stop it.
All right, so we'll stop there with thinking about that particular piece. But what I want you guys to do is share with me, okay, some of the observations that you made as you were watching that video. So what are some things that you noticed as a function of this in-group, out-group that they set up? Okay, that Jane Elliott in her classic experiment here set up. Okay, so what were some of the ways that you saw the bias come out? What are some just kind of general reactions to this experiment? Again, Jane Elliott did this in classroom. She's actually going on to do demonstrations of this for quite some time, and it works relatively consistent. What were some of the things that you thought were really kind of interesting to take note of? Okay, so you can jump in with audio, you can share on chat. Okay, so first observation, kind of kids that were in the minority, at times were being bullied by the majority. You can see that even when they flipped, okay, that still was consistent. Okay, so there's kind of difference in terms of that majority group having a higher status position, so great observation.
I think it's just interesting how, like, they wouldn't have even known until she pointed it out. And then all of a sudden it was like a huge deal and they were treating each other like awful and everything like that, even though if nobody would have said anything, they wouldn't have even known.
So I think that's a great observation. One that I noticed every time I watch this is that just through something simple as putting collars around blue-eyed and brown-eyed, something that they probably didn't pay any attention to, you're able to get these really distinct differences. And I think it's interesting, as I was watching it this time, to think about her as kind of this authority figure that's kind of establishing these or at least magnifying these differences between the two different groups. Okay, and kind of think about what that does in terms of other authority figures in our current society, government leaders, those around you, kind of magnifying potential differences. Okay, so again, something they probably weren't treating each other differently based on eye color, but suddenly this has meaning. Okay, other things that you noticed.
She was also doing that with the labeling theory too.
Okay, so how so?
So like when they were doing the math problems, she would say, well, blue-eyed people are smarter and they go faster, or like the day when the brown-eyeds, it would take them longer to do that. So she was kind of helping with that difference right there with the labeling theory.
So great observation. I love that. She's applying that labeling theory. Okay, so we talked about that as a social influence tactic. That you label someone, they might act in a way that's consistent with that. To help establish these differences, she's feeding into that. So in her case, she's doing it to generate these differences, to make the blue-eyed versus brown-eyed more distinct. But you can see how that would also kind of extend and exacerbate, this difference between groups. So great observation there. Okay. Other things that you were kind of noticing as you were watching the video in terms of how kids are reacting, in terms of how she set up these groups, how the groups are acting towards each other, just kind of natural observations. And I want to get kind of 2 or 3 other responses because I think it's interesting to, kind of process it and see it this way.
I also thought it was interesting how, like, at first it didn't seem like the kids like wanted to go along with it. Like, you could tell they were kind of like hesitant, like, what is she talking about? But then like through her like continuous reinforcement, and also like they started feeding off of each other, and I feel like they were just doing what everybody else was doing. So if one person like was being mean to someone with brown eyes, then they would go along with it, even though at first they were hesitant to like go with what the teacher was saying.
And I think that's another great observation. You kind of see that hesitancy. I think you're absolutely right, but then it kind of starts to take on a life of its own. It'd be interesting to see how much Jane Elliott prompts that with her labeling, with kind of trying to draw out these differences. But I also argue, if you think about Sharif's experiment, I think it comes out naturally too. It comes out with this in-group, out-group favoritism that we see even with these more minimal groups. And again, keep in mind, Jane Elliott preceded Tajfel, so he's kind of saying, well, hey, she's creating things. Sharif is kind of creating these differences. Let's see if we can remove some of this labeling that might be going on, this influence that's going on, and then let's see if that has an impact later on. Okay? Maybe 1 or 2 other observations that you notice. I think one of the biggest ones that we didn't tap into, but if you kind of think back, was the performance of students. Okay, so the one group that she was talking about, it took 5 plus minutes to go through that word pack, that card pack. But then when they were no longer kind of being stigmatized, they weren't that minority group, they were more effective the next day. Remember, they were only about 2.5, so less than half that amount of time. And, you know, we'll talk about the consequences of being part of a stigmatized group by being part of a minority group and what that does, especially in terms of test taking, exams and things like that. So we'll get into the details of that, but it just shows you that impact that we have when we think about groups and how they have an impact on our status, our identity, our well-being, kind of our self-esteem. When their self-esteem was lower because they were seen as kind of this lesser group, they acted that way. That was consistent with then their responses. And so I think you again see a lot of these things coming together. You also saw towards the end that you could bring the group together. Okay, so that was something interesting. You know, in her case, it wasn't necessarily there was a superordinate goal, but kind of explaining what was going on and trying to make that demonstration. So with this, again, we can see that this arbitrary assignment brings out a lot of different consequences, including, you know, even physical violence for these kids that were getting along with each other, you know, were being mean to each other, physically harming each other. And so as you look at things around you in terms of looking at groups and how they respond, you know, keep in mind that some of the things that you might be seeing in terms of aggression are kind of natural byproducts of this in-group, out-group favoritism. But this is kind of a function of things that we have. One of the things that happens is that as we go through our day, we naturally categorize individuals as in-group or out-group members. That's a basic function we have because it helps us kind of save cognitive energy, helps us kind of think about how we're going to interact with others. And so because of that, this is a natural process we have. And as a part of this natural process, we have this natural consequence of this in-group, out-group favoritism, even in situations where it really has no meaning. So let me pause at this point to see if you guys have any last questions. We're actually at a great wrapping point. On Thursday, what we'll do is get into measurement of bias. We'll talk a little about how the different forms of bias. But let me pause at this point as we kind of set our foundation, see if there's any last questions. Otherwise, we'll then be all set for today. Okay, so let me know if you're all good or if you have questions.
I have a question about the test, actually.
Okay, sure.
Because there was one question that I was confused about because there were 2 of the same answers.
Okay.
It was like the one about him being like a narcissist because, or like it was like asked if he was a narcissist because he was like really nice to his group. He like always had them over. He was like a leader.
Right. So for that particular one, I sent out, a student caught the mistake. I sent out a new version of it. It was 2 different types of leaders. I think one was like more individualistic, was kind of more narcissistic leading. And the second option that was corrected was D, which was more kind of a communal leader. I can pull up the exam if you want.
Okay.
So it wasn't, it was a mistake in the exam that I corrected. If that's something that you didn't have the corrected exam, you can email me and let me know. We can sort it out from there.
Okay, well, I don't know why I put D. I just did, so I think I got it right.
Okay, so I mean, the correct answer there was D. It was just a typo that I missed.
Okay.
So if you did have an issue with that, where you saw 2 the same answer and it goofed you up, just send me an email and let me know.
Okay.
But looking at the exams, most of you guys got that answer correct, so I didn't see it as being a big issue, but I'm glad you asked. So if it was a problem for you, let me know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Other questions or concerns? All right, guys. Well, again, I super appreciate you being here, working through things, getting us started with our next section of material. We'll keep delving into stereotyping, prejudice, discrimination on Thursdays. Probably spend a little bit of time on Tuesday with that as well. If there's anything I can help you with anything, please let me know. Otherwise, definitely stay safe, take care of yourselves. I'll see you guys on Thursday.